Mafia boss Herd's waitress cursed in Italian under her breath. He leaned closer. Say that again. The plate slipped from my hands before I could catch it, shattering across the gleaming marble floor with a crack so sharp and sudden it felt like lightning had torn through the stillness of Giardino. The porcelain shards scattered like snow over the dark tile, while the expensive veal with mushroom sauce spilled into a messy, shameful smear right in the middle of the aisle between the dining tables. For a moment, the entire restaurant froze. The clinking of silverware stopped. Every eye turned toward me, eyebrows furrowed, whispers rising, and no attempt to hide the stunned expressions. My heart felt as if it had dropped clean out of my chest. Porca miseria. The Italian curse slipped through my teeth before I could bite it back, the same one my grandmother used to mutter whenever she dropped a bowl. It stretched in the tense air, lingering awkwardly, and then I dropped to my knees, hands trembling as I began picking up the sharp fragments. My face burned as though it had been slapped. One shard came close to slicing my finger, but I kept moving, pretending not to notice, pretending I wasn't desperate to flee the weight of all those eyes pinning me to the floor. Miss Carter, that's the third plate this week. The voice of Mr. Donnelly, the evening manager at Giardino, rang out like a gavel striking the marble. He stood with arms crossed at the center of the dining room, his round belly swaying with each step, his face flushed red with fury. This time, it's coming out of your paycheck. I don't want to hear another apology. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. I mumbled, though I knew it was a lie. When you're working two jobs, each shift stretching close to 10 hours, and your brain has gone dull from lack of sleep, your hands stop being precise. Especially when you're just trying to survive another day in a city like Chicago, where everything costs more than human patience. I rushed to the back restroom to fetch a broom and dustpan. When I returned, something in the atmosphere had shifted. The chatter had quieted. The restaurant now hummed with an eerie, low silence, like wind slipping through the cracks of an old door. I looked toward the entrance. Just then, the heavy wooden doors pushed open. Light fell across the face of a man, and in an instant, the entire room seemed to draw inward. Mr. Romano, an honor to have you with us. The maitre d's voice rose from the front desk, trembling with respect. Your private table is ready. I stood frozen. No one in Chicago didn't know the name Lucas Romano. Even if you pretended not to hear, not to see, the shadow of the Romano family loomed over this city. They owned half the fine dining establishments, boutique hotels, art auction houses. The other half belonged to rumor, whispers of the underworld, protection rackets, money laundering, and worse. But no one dared speak with certainty. They had lawyers, they had money, and they had that particular kind of fear people like to call respect. Lucas entered, followed by three men in dark suits, broad-shouldered with squared jaws, eyes sweeping the room like scanners. But it was he who commanded the space. Tall, powerful, his tailored black suit sculpted to his frame, each stride deliberate as if claiming the ground beneath him. His black hair was slicked back, his dark eyes cold and sharp as a blade. I couldn't look away, and the worst part was, when I thought I was only stealing a glance, his eyes turned and found mine, locked onto me. My heart skipped a beat. He glanced down at the broken porcelain still lying beside me, then back up at my face, flushed red with shame. He said nothing, just looked, deeply, as though he had already read the whole of my awful night in a single blink. I dropped my eyes, gripping the broom handle tighter, gathering the last of the shards, but my breath slowed, something shifting in the air around me. And even without turning, I knew with absolute certainty, he was still watching me. If you're still here, listening to this moment, thank you for taking the time to be part of the first chapter in this emotional journey. Where are you tuning in from? Leave a comment below to let us know how far this story has traveled across this vast country. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share the YouTube channel Dear Single Mom so we can continue walking together through stories that are heartfelt, thoughtful, and deeply human every single day. There is so much more ahead waiting for you, and believe me when I say, what just happened was only the beginning. Now, let us step forward into the second part of this story. I hadn't even made it to the kitchen when Mr. Donnelly's voice sliced through the air behind me, sharp as a knife. "Emma, table 7 needs service," Monica called out at the last minute. His voice was tight, edged with urgency. I stopped in place, still holding the broom against my chest, my heart sinking at the number he had just said. Table 7. The same table where Lucas Romano had just taken a seat, his back to the wall like a man surveying the entire battlefield with a single glance. I turned slightly, stammering. "But that's—" Donnelly cut me off. "Doesn't matter who it is. You're the only one left on the floor. Don't mess up anything else. One mistake with the Romanos, and you know what that means." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with legs that felt filled with lead. I took a deep breath, retied my apron, wiped my palms on the hem of my uniform skirt, and pulled the order pad from my pocket. As I stepped out from the kitchen, I whispered to myself, "Just take the order, serve the right drinks, say nothing stupid, and whatever you do, don't spill anything else." I approached table 7 with the most professional smile I could summon. Lucas sat in the center, back against the wall, surrounded by 3 men speaking in low voices, their eyes scanning every movement in the room. The light from the overhead fixture softened the black of his suit, but not the chill in his demeanor. I stopped at the edge of the table, offered a slight nod. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Giardino. May I offer you something to drink to start?" My voice didn't shake, or at least, I hoped it didn't. The 3 men each ordered a whiskey, a bourbon, and a scotch. Lucas remained silent, his gaze steady, watching me as if reading every small flaw. The uneven stitching on my sleeve, the faint scuff at the cuff, the faded stain at the hem of my skirt I hadn't managed to scrub out after the morning shift. I turned to him, keeping my eyes fixed at the space between his eyebrows to avoid locking directly into his. "And for you, sir?" Lucas tilted his head slightly, his voice low and deliberate, the final word almost musical, but out of key in a way that drew the ear. "You're new." I blinked once. "No, I've worked here 8 months now." He gave a small nod, the corner of his mouth barely lifting. "Funny, I've never seen you. I usually work mornings and weekdays." He said nothing else, just glanced down at the menu and said, "Barolo, the 2010 vintage." I jotted it down quickly and was just turning to leave when he added, "Soft as wind." "You bring it. No one else." A simple request on the surface, but I knew without a doubt it wasn't a suggestion. Back at the bar, my heart was still racing. Under the warm, dim light, I focused on steadying my breathing, pouring each drink with precision. I carried the tray in both hands, balancing it as though I were carrying a piece of crystal, and stepped carefully toward table 7. Lucas looked up as I placed the glass before him, his eyes meeting mine. "Thank you, Emma." He spoke my name like he was tasting it. I couldn't recall telling him who I was, and the realization sent a slow chill down my spine. The meal unfolded under a taut silence. Every time I approached, their conversation would hush. Each time I bent to set a plate or pour a glass, I could feel Lucas's gaze following every move. The other 3 men remained cool, speaking only when necessary. But Lucas was different. He never looked away. Not with disrespect. Not with desire, but as if calculating something I hadn't yet understood. When I brought dessert, one of the men, Carter if I heard right, let his fingers graze mine as he accepted the dish. I pulled back reflexively, causing the plate to shift slightly on the tray. The man chuckled. Careful now, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you dropping another one. I bit my lip, about to respond when Lucas's voice cut in, sharp and cold. That's enough, Carter. The entire table fell silent. Carter jerked his hand back as if he'd touched a live wire. Sorry, boss. Just messing around. She's not here for your entertainment. Lucas's voice was steady, firm, his eyes still locked on mine, unblinking. I bowed my head in quiet thanks, forcing my body to stay calm as I backed away toward the kitchen. My palms were slick with sweat, but it wasn't just nerves. It was something else. A deeper sensation. The feeling of stepping across the threshold into a world I wasn't prepared for, and the one pulling me into it, still watching me from across the room at table 7, was Lucas Romano. The man who could silence an entire restaurant with a single glance. The man who had spoken my name in a voice so low and deliberate it sent my senses into a storm of confusion. And in that moment, I began to understand. Everything tonight was only the beginning. The next morning, I arrived at Dolce Vita earlier than usual. A light rain fell outside, and the damp, chilly air crept through the threads of my coat, making me shiver as I unlocked the cafe door. Tucked into a quiet corner of North Chicago, this small coffee shop was the only place in the city where I didn't feel like I had to brace myself just to get through the day. Carmela, the owner, was nearing 60, a native Italian with a heart bigger than the espresso machine she loved like family. She was also the only person in this city who had ever asked me, with genuine concern, whether I'd eaten. She often complained that I was thin as a linguine noodle, and every early shift came with an unspoken rule she wouldn't let me start work until I'd eaten at least half a pastry. This morning was no different. Emma, you skipped breakfast again, didn't you? Sit down. Her voice had that firm tenderness as she caught me slipping behind the counter. I opened my mouth to argue, but the hunger clawing at my stomach made me nod instead. She placed a slice of frittata and a steaming cappuccino in front of me, then disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with thoughts that still hadn't settled from the night before. I hadn't slept. Not really. The memory of Lucas's eyes, the sound of his voice when he said my name, the quiet intensity that wrapped around every moment near him kept looping in my mind. There was something about that man I couldn't shake. And it wasn't just the way he looked, or the power that trailed behind his name like smoke. It was the silence he carried, the kind that drew attention, not with noise, but with presence. The kind of attention that unsettles you, makes you forget your footing. By the time the clock inched toward 8, the cafe had begun to stir with life. I tied my hair back, wiped my hands clean, and stepped out from behind the counter, greeting regulars, pouring espresso shots, arranging pastries on the display tray. Everything flowed in that familiar rhythm, calm and predictable, until the bell above the door chimed and I looked up. My heart skipped a beat. Lucas Romano stood in the doorway. The black suit was gone. Instead, he wore a charcoal crew-neck sweater and dark jeans, a look far more relaxed, but no less striking. Behind him stood another man, not one of the 3 from the night before, but someone older, eyes sharp, shoulders slightly stooped, lingering near the entrance like a silent shadow. Lucas scanned the cafe as though surveying a space entirely unfamiliar. Then his gaze found mine. And just for a moment, the faintest trace of a smile touched his lips. "Good morning, Emma." He said it as he reached the counter, his voice still low and steady like the night before. But this time, there was something softer in it, something almost gentle. I tried to maintain my composure, though I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "What can I get for you, sir?" I asked, silently hoping he was just here for a quick coffee to go, like everyone else. But Lucas shook his head. "I'll stay. A double espresso. And choose a pastry for me. Something you think fits." I nodded, turned to the machine, hands steady but thoughts racing. Why was he here? How did he even know I worked at this cafe? I had never mentioned it, never posted about it anywhere. When I returned with the espresso and a warm almond croissant on a small plate, Lucas had already chosen a table by the window, the kind of spot where one could see both the street and the entire room. I set everything down and was about to turn away when his voice stopped me. Sit with me, if you've got a minute. I hesitated. I'm working, actually. Lucas glanced around the cafe, then gestured toward Carmela, who had just stepped out from the kitchen. She looked at me, then at Lucas, and in that instant something in her expression shifted. Romano, she whispered, her voice thick with her native Italian accent. I was surprised I had never seen Carmela unsettled before. Lucas gave her a polite nod. Antonio always spoke highly of your pastries. My father mentioned you often. Carmela froze, then gave a short nod. Just a few minutes, Emma, she said quietly, before disappearing back into the kitchen. I sat down, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Lucas studied me for a moment before speaking. I came because I'd like to invite you to an event. This Saturday night. I frowned. An event? A gala, hosted by my mother. It's a fundraiser for pediatric care. He spoke casually, as if this were something he did all the time. I stared at him, unblinking. Why me? Lucas didn't answer right away. He simply looked at me, as if weighing whether or not to tell the truth. Because you made me curious. And because you didn't lower your eyes when you stood in front of me. He paused, then added, I want you there. Not as a server. As my guest. I laughed a short, dry laugh without any real release behind it. I don't own anything that would pass for gala attire. Lucas smiled faintly. That can be arranged. I was about to refuse when he said something that made the words catch in my throat. I spoke with Mr. Donnelly. You have Saturday night off. My eyes widened. You called him? Without even asking me? Lucas shrugged. I simply handled the things I thought might keep you from saying yes. The choice, the rest of it, is yours. Then he placed a card on the table. It bore no name, only a single phone number. Saturday night. A car will wait for you at 7. If you don't come out, I'll understand. But if you step into that car, I promise that night will change something. With that, he stood, adjusted his sweater, and turned to go. Just before reaching the door, he looked back at me one last time. Don't overthink it, Emma. Just step into the car. And then he was gone, leaving behind a half-finished coffee and a question that stirred inside me like a cup of espresso, still unblended. Friday afternoon, I returned to my small third-floor apartment in an aging building on Belmont Street and found a large box placed neatly in front of my door. There was no delivery person in sight, no note except for a small card tucked beneath a precisely tied black silk ribbon. I bent down to pick it up, my hand trembling slightly, though I tried to appear calm. The handwriting was elegant, slanted in deep black ink, the kind that felt old world, almost Italian in its grace. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock, make me proud. It was signed with a single letter. L. There was no need for more. I already knew who it was from. Gently, I pushed open the door, pulled the box inside, and closed it behind me with a softness that made me feel as if any sound might betray something I hadn't yet named. My apartment was small and unadorned, just enough space for a narrow bed, a sagging bookshelf, a worn-out dining table, and a tiny kitchen that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee whenever I overcooked anything, which was often. I set the box on the bed, untied the ribbon, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, shimmering beneath a layer of silver tissue, was a black evening gown, the fabric sleek and fluid, with a neckline traced in delicate beading that caught the light like scattered stars. I had never seen anything so beautiful, let alone touched it. Beside the dress was a pair of matching high heels, classic in shape, understated in design, but so exquisitely elegant that they seemed almost out of place in a room like mine. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my fingers grazing the smooth fabric, my thoughts spinning. I should refuse. I should call him, return it all, tell him I can't. But I didn't reach for my phone. Instead, I sat there for nearly an hour, unmoving, staring at the dress as if I were staring at a version of myself I didn't recognize, a version I wasn't sure I deserved. I had always believed I was strong enough to survive without anyone's help. I had learned to reject ease, because too many times in my life, things that looked good from the outside came with a cost too steep to name. So why couldn't I look away? It wasn't the price of the dress. It was the man who had sent it, and the way he made me feel, just for a moment, like I was seen. Like I was understood not for what I lacked, but for something I hadn't yet discovered in myself. I stood, walked to the small mirror hanging by the door, the same one I used every morning to fix my hair before heading out. I looked at my reflection, a face pale from lack of sleep, eyes shadowed, hair pulled back loosely with a worn elastic band. I didn't look like the kind of woman a man like Lucas Romano would invite to a gala. I looked like someone who was simply trying to survive day by day, hour by hour. And tomorrow night, if I wore that dress and stepped into that car, what would I even do in a room filled with people like him? Would I be brave enough to stand beside him when every eye in the room might land on me with doubt, with judgment, maybe even with disdain? I turned back to the bed, slowly folding the dress back into the box. But then I stopped. I reached for the card again, read those few handwritten words once more. Make me proud. And for a moment, I thought of my mother. She once told me that there are doors in life that never open unless you dare to knock. Maybe this was one of those doors. No one was forcing me to go. No one was dragging me into Lucas's world. But if I didn't step forward, would I regret it? Not for missing a party, but for missing the chance to meet a version of myself I had never allowed to exist. Night fell quickly, and I still hadn't found a clear answer. But as I placed the box on the wooden chair by the window, the streetlight spilling in caught the folds of the black dress, and for a fleeting moment it shimmered like ink flowing under moonlight. Deep down, I already knew which way my heart was leaning. And though fear still lingered, though certainty felt far away, I couldn't deny the feeling that was quietly rising in my chest. A touch of anticipation, a flicker of curiosity, and the most dangerous of all, a glimmer of hope. Saturday evening, precisely at 7, the black car pulled up in front of my aging building like a quiet brushstroke of ink across the dim street. I was already waiting on the sidewalk, the dress box now empty in my room, and the dress itself wrapped around me like a second skin, like something I wasn't just wearing, but becoming. It fit so perfectly, so intimately, that it felt as though it had been made for me long before I ever knew the name Lucas Romano. The driver said nothing. He only opened the door and gave a slight nod. I stepped in, my heart beating faster than usual, though I kept my hands steady in my lap, unwilling to let the nerves show. The car slid through the city in silence, streetlights passing across the windows like drifting ribbons of light. I caught my reflection in the small mirror, hair swept into a soft bun, lips tinted the color of aged wine, eyes holding something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was confidence. Maybe just the hope that no one would notice how tightly I was holding myself together. When the car turned through the gates of the Romano estate, I had to hold my breath. The house rose before me like something pulled from an old European novel, its arched rooflines, golden-lit windows, and rows of perfectly manicured trees guiding the way to the grand entrance. Dozens of cars lined the drive, guests dressed in gowns and tuxedos ascending the ivory carpet that led through the tall doors. I stepped out, barely steady on the heels, and before I could take a full step forward, I saw him. Lucas. Not a bodyguard, not a member of his family, but him, waiting. Standing at the top of the steps in a classic black tuxedo, black tie, white shirt gleaming under the warm glow of the lights. His eyes found me the moment I emerged, and for a single instant, every murmuring doubt in my mind fell completely silent. Emma. He said it quietly, but his voice carried, clear and certain. You look... I tilted my head, cutting gently into the unfinished thought. Different? I don't recognize myself either. Lucas stepped closer, the soft gold light brushing against his features, warming the usual sharpness in his gaze. No, not different. Right. You look exactly right. As if you've always belonged in this world. Only now, you've finally stepped into it. The words made me pause. For just a beat, I stood still. He extended his hand. Come with me. I placed my hand in his, and in that moment, I could feel it, the warmth of his touch flowing through my fingers, steady and real, like an invitation not just into a place, but into something unknown, something just beginning. The grand hall inside was breathtaking, a kind of opulence that made you forget how to breathe for a moment. Crystal chandeliers burned bright overhead. White and gold flowers arranged in lavish clusters lined the corridors, and the sound of a string ensemble floated gently from a corner of the room like something out of an old, forgotten waltz. Heads turned the moment Lucas walked in with me by his side. Some guests nodded politely at him. Others looked at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. But Lucas never once let go of my hand, never wavered as he guided me through the crowd, introducing me in that calm, self-assured voice of his. This is Emma Carter, my guest this evening. He didn't say it like a man introducing a date, nor like someone making small talk over champagne flutes. He said it in a way that made people understand I was here because he had chosen for me to be. And that choice was not up for discussion. I did my best to remain composed, to meet greetings with polite smiles and return each handshake without letting my nerves slip through my grip. But my eyes kept scanning the room, waiting for something to give me away, some silent signal that I didn't belong here, because I didn't. I knew that. But Lucas made it feel like I was walking solid ground in shoes that had always fit, even if I'd only just now dared to put them on. At a temporary bar set along the side of the room, he handed me a glass of white wine and leaned in slightly to speak. Everything all right? I nodded. I haven't tripped or spilled anything yet. That counts as a win. He let out a quiet laugh, his eyes softening. You don't have to try to fit into my world, Emma. Just be yourself. It was a simple sentence, but it landed in my chest like a quiet, powerful ache. When the soft chime rang out, signaling that the charity auction was about to begin, Lucas turned to me. I'll have to go up and speak for a few minutes. Will you be all right on your own? I nodded. Yes. He stepped away, but not before leaning in close, his voice low against my ear. I don't like the way some of them look at you, but I want them to see. I want them to know you're here because I chose it, and they'll have to get used to that. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me there with a heart pounding like it had just heard its own name spoken out loud for the first time. And it wasn't the wine making my head light. It was something else entirely. It was the dizzying realization that for the first time in my life, someone wasn't hiding me, wasn't apologizing for me. He was standing before a room full of people, powerful people, and saying, without fear or hesitation, that I was someone to be noticed. And I didn't know if I had the strength to walk through the rest of this night without being pulled even deeper into the gravity of his gaze, the gaze of Lucas Romano. I stood silently beside the long banquet table draped in white linen, my glass of wine cooling in my hand as the minutes passed, eyes fixed on Lucas as he spoke from the stage. He stood tall, his back straight, voice deep and warm, ringing out clearly through the grandeur of the ballroom. People weren't just listening out of politeness. They listened because the authority in his presence demanded it. I had never seen anyone so composed, yet so sharp. Every word he spoke, every glance he gave, felt deliberate, as though each movement had been quietly rehearsed long before this night. I smiled softly to myself, not realizing how tightly I had wrapped my fingers around the glass, the swell of emotion rising quietly in my chest. A woman's voice sliced gently through my thoughts. "You're very brave to be standing here." I turned, meeting the gaze of a tall woman with softly waved blonde hair and lips painted the shade of lacquered crimson, as if brushed on by an artist's hand. Her wine-colored gown hugged her frame with practiced elegance, and under the crystal lights, its subtle shimmer made her look like she'd stepped out of the cover of a magazine. But her eyes held none of that shine. There was nothing sweet in them. "I'm Victoria LeBlanc. I'm sure you've heard of me." I froze, just for a moment. I had heard her name, in the quiet murmurs that circled around Lucas, in the half-told stories passed between servers or whispered near the bar. The ex, the one who came from a family with weight behind its name. The woman who had once seemed like the perfect match for someone like him. I never imagined I'd meet her, and certainly never imagined she would come to me. I gave a small nod, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hello, I'm Emma." Victoria smiled, the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. "You're not like the women Lucas usually brings to these things. Not in a bad way. Just searching for the right word here. Unpolished." I knew what she meant. Simple, ordinary, maybe even forgettable. But I didn't flinch. I had learned, over the years, that silence is often the sharpest answer in battles you never meant to fight. She took a step closer, her champagne glass tilting slightly as she swirled it in her hand. "I'm only curious. This gala isn't open to just anyone, especially not to someone Lucas walks in with publicly. So tell me, what exactly are you to him?" I was just about to answer when a deep male voice behind me sliced through the air, freezing the moment where it stood. "That's enough, Victoria." Lucas appeared from behind me, his eyes locked onto hers, his voice quiet but sharp, like a blade sliding across glass. She turned to him with a smile, smooth and practiced, as if nothing had happened at all. "Just a little chat between two women," she said lightly. Lucas stepped beside me, without hesitation placing his hand on the small of my back. That gesture alone, firm and sure, was a silent declaration. If that was a conversation, then I'd like it to end here. I don't think Emma needs to respond to pointed questions in the middle of a charity gala. Beneath the silk of my dress, I could feel my body tensing, but along with it came a quiet wave of something else, the steady calm of protection, radiating from where his hand touched me. Victoria shrugged, setting her glass on the nearest table. No offense intended. I was just surprised, that's all. In any case, I hope you both enjoy your evening." She turned and walked away with long, confident strides, like the marble floor belonged to her, leaving behind the sharp scent of perfume and a silence that settled like a veil between Lucas and me. He looked at me, his voice low, softer now. "Are you all right?" I nodded, though my eyes couldn't quite hide the trace of unease still clinging there. He exhaled quietly. "Victoria is part of the past. I have no intention of letting her return, even in the smallest, most indirect way." I looked him straight in the eye, refusing to look away. I'm not easily shaken by a few cutting words, but I'm not naive either. I know I'm not the kind of woman this world expects to see standing next to you. Lucas paused for a beat, then gently tightened his grip on my hand. "You're right. You're not like the others. And that's exactly why. You're the first person I've ever wanted no one to misunderstand. You're my choice. And I've never made a wrong one." Those words, spoken beneath a canopy of golden lights and soft music trailing in from the far side of the room, gave me a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in what felt like a lifetime. The feeling of standing on someone's side and having someone stand on mine. Not for gain. Not because the world said it made sense, but simply because of who I was. And that, to me, felt more unfamiliar than anything in the glittering world laid out before me. The next morning, I returned to my apartment caught somewhere between dream and daylight. The gala had unfolded like a dream stitched from silk, crystal, and the steady gaze of Lucas. For one night, I had existed in a different world, one where I wasn't serving, where I didn't bow my head, where my hands didn't tremble from the weight of a tray, but from the brush of a touch that quieted an entire room. But dreams always dissolve in the morning, and I knew that better than most. Still dazed by the echo of the night before, I answered a call from an unfamiliar number. The woman on the other end spoke with elegant formality, her tone polite but unmistakably clear. Mrs. Romano, Lucas's mother, would like to invite you to afternoon tea at the family estate. The invitation was spoken softly, but I understood at once. This wasn't a request, it was a summons. And I would have to go unless I was prepared to face something far more uncomfortable than a cup of tea. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I stood before the Romano estate once again. But unlike the grandeur of gala night, today the scene was quiet, subdued. The house sat bathed in soft sunlight, and the trees lining the iron gates cast long shadows across the stone walkway. A housekeeper greeted me and led me through a wide hallway, past polished floors and silent portraits, and into a small tea room that opened onto the garden in back. There, already seated, was a woman. She wore an ivory dress, her hair swept into a precise chignon, and every movement from lifting her teacup to setting it down was meticulous, honed by a lifetime inside the world of the elite. She didn't rise when I entered. Her eyes swept over me from head to toe, unhurried, unapologetically assessing. "Please, sit." Her voice was soft but sharp, each word polished like the edge of a gem, leaving no room for misunderstanding. I sat across from her, back straight, hands resting neatly in my lap. She poured the tea without looking at me, but still she spoke. "I've heard about last night. Lucas has never brought anyone to a gala. Never." I wasn't sure whether to speak or stay silent, so I chose silence. She glanced at me again. "Miss Emma, I believe you are a woman with self-respect, and I believe you understand that what's happening between you and my son has stepped outside the bounds of the ordinary. The issue is, Lucas doesn't live an ordinary life. His world is made of expectations, leverage, responsibility, and cost. You are an outsider, and eventually, you'll be forced to reckon with that." My throat felt dry. It wasn't a threat, not in tone, but it was the sound of someone tapping gently at a door I hadn't fully stepped through yet. "You're young, smart. You could start over," she continued, this time meeting my gaze directly. "I don't doubt his feelings, but I do doubt whether you understand what comes with being beside someone like him." I bit my lower lip gently, keeping my voice level. "Ma'am, I didn't pursue Lucas. I didn't chase him. I stood where I was, and he chose to come closer. If that was a mistake, I'll be the first to step away. But I'm not a bystander in this story." For the first time during our conversation, I saw something shift in her eyes, a flicker of surprise, a flicker of caution. She went quiet for a beat, then reached into the small leather bag beside her and placed a thick envelope on the table between us. No rush, no gesture of insistence, just a quiet offering. Inside is $75,000, enough to leave this city, begin a new life. Education, a home, a fresh start. No one would know. No questions. You'd leave quietly, and I can promise Lucas would never have to feel the pain of it. I looked at the envelope like it was a trap already sprung. That kind of money could change everything. It could pay for school, for rent, for care for my grandmother in the South. It could buy sleep without fear of hunger. But in return, I would be walking away from the only world that, for the first time in my life, felt like it might have space for someone like me. I rose slowly from my chair, my hands never touching the envelope. "Thank you for your honesty," I said. "But I don't take money from people who don't know who I am. If Lucas wants me to go, he'll say it himself. And if he doesn't, then no one else has the right to make that decision for him." I gave a polite nod, turned, and walked out of the room. My back was straight. My eyes didn't look back. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter from the inside out. I didn't know if I'd fall apart once I made it home. But in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had not sold my dignity. And whatever came next, whatever storm might rise from this choice, Lucas would hear it from me. Not from his mother. And not from the silent weight of a white envelope left behind on a tea table. I don't remember exactly how I left the Romano estate. The walk from the quiet garden to the front gate stretched on like a path without end, each step heavy with questions that hadn't yet found answers. Her words echoed in my mind, not loud but persistent, like a sound carried from someplace both distant and dangerously close. $75,000. It wasn't just a number. It was a measure of what my presence cost in Lucas's world. I had said no, but my heart wasn't as calm as the face I'd managed to wear. For the rest of the afternoon and well into the evening, I stayed tucked away inside my apartment, trying to lose myself in silence. I made myself a cup of tea and left it untouched, its warmth fading on the table. I thought of Lucas. I thought of whether he knew what had happened, and if he did, what he would say. At precisely 8, 3 knocks sounded at the door, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. I startled slightly, then opened it. Lucas stood there, white dress shirt, sleeves rolled just above the wrists, no tie, no jacket. He didn't need anything to make an impression. His presence alone was gravity. He didn't ask if I was free. He didn't explain. He simply said, "Come with me." I didn't ask where. I just grabbed my coat and followed. The car brought us to a side gate of the Romano estate. There were no lights glowing, no staff in sight. Just a narrow path leading to the back of the house, where an old wooden door waited, weathered but solid. Lucas unlocked it himself, and as it creaked open, the scent of old oak and aging pages drifted into the air. It was a library. High ceilings, tall shelves stretching to the top, warm yellow light casting soft halos across the room. It was quiet, not empty, but still, as if the books themselves were holding their breath. Lucas led me to a corner where 2 worn leather armchairs faced each other beside a small ebony table. A silver teapot sat between them, steam curling gently from the spout. He poured the tea, then sat opposite me, looking straight into my eyes. "My mother came to see you." I nodded. "She asked you to leave." There was no surprise in his voice. But the next words came softer, as if scraped from something deeper. "She offered you money. 75,000. You said no." "I know, because she told me, but I wanted to hear it from you. I didn't take the money because I have pride, and because I didn't want to leave. It's not about the money. It's not about who you are. It's because when I stood in a room full of people who looked at me like I didn't belong, you were the only one who didn't flinch, who didn't question me." Lucas didn't answer right away. He looked down at the cup in his hands, then back at me, his dark eyes softened by something warmer than the glow above us. "You don't need to be anyone else, Emma. You don't need to fit. That's what I love most." He stopped himself on that word. Love. It hovered between us like an unfinished sentence, but even unsaid, I heard it in the way the air changed. He stood and stepped toward me, his pace slow, deliberate. When he stopped in front of me, I could smell the faint trace of Earl Grey on his shirt, the aged scent of leather-bound books, and something unspoken that lingered in the quiet between us. He reached out and touched my cheek. His fingers were rough but gentle, as if he was still afraid I might vanish. He didn't ask. He didn't rush. He simply leaned in, and I closed my eyes. The kiss came like a whisper, soft, unhurried, and when it touched my lips, it melted every wall I had spent years building. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't possessive. It was a quiet vow from a man who had never chased, and yet never retreated. I placed my hand over his chest and felt the slow, steady rhythm of his heart, a calm against the storm that had been my life. When his lips left mine, I opened my eyes to find him still watching me. He said nothing, but his gaze told me everything. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what waited beyond this moment. But here, between rows of books and the hush of a private world, I knew I had crossed into something I couldn't return from. And I didn't want to return. Not this time. Not when the man standing across from me was Lucas Romano. The next morning, Lucas left early. He didn't say much, just a soft kiss on my forehead and a low murmur that he had business at the southern docks. His voice was quiet, roughened slightly by sleep or something heavier, and his eyes held a kind of deliberation that made me still. I didn't ask where exactly he was going, or whether he'd be safe, or when he'd be back. Part of me wanted to reach out and hold him there, just a moment longer. But another part understood. Lucas lived in a world where questions like those didn't always get answers. I only nodded and watched him walk out the door. Then I turned back into the apartment, toward the tea he'd made just before leaving, the pot still faintly warm. A strange silence filled the space, not hostile, just unfamiliar. I sat at the table, eyes lingering on the closed door, heart tangled in thoughts I didn't dare name out loud. That afternoon, while I was reorganizing a shelf, a knock came at the door. It wasn't Lucas's, I knew that instantly. This one was softer but clear, precise. I wiped my hands and opened it. Mrs. Romano stood there. She wore a pale beige coat, her silver-streaked hair pinned flawlessly, not a single strand out of place. Her presence filled the doorway not with grandeur, but with certainty. She didn't wait for pleasantries. "Do you have a moment?" Her voice was just as it had been before, gentle but leaving no space for refusal. I nodded, motioned her inside. I moved instinctively, putting on the kettle, setting out 2 cups, trying not to overthink the quiet question that pulsed through my head. Why had she come back? We sat facing each other. The distance between us narrowed to the small wooden table I usually stacked with books. She didn't glance around the room, didn't acknowledge its smallness, its worn edges. She looked only at me, and this time her gaze held something different. Less judgment, more thought. "Lucas is gone," she said. I nodded. "Yes. This morning. The southern docks." She sipped her tea slowly. "Do you know what that means?" I wasn't sure how to answer. All I knew was the weight in his expression, how he had carried something with him he hadn't wanted me to see, something heavy enough to press against the silence he left behind. She set her cup down, folding her hands in her lap. "There are things I cannot explain plainly, but if you truly intend to be part of Lucas's life, you must understand when he leaves like that, it is never simple. It isn't ordinary work. It isn't routine business. It's about decisions, conflict. Sometimes it's about loss. Can you accept that?" I didn't answer immediately. There was a quiet war happening inside me. I wasn't naive. I had known, on some level, that Lucas didn't belong entirely to the world of boardrooms and contracts, that there were shadows he moved through, ones he never forced me to enter, but never denied either. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice steady. "I don't know if I can accept everything, but I know this. I don't want to turn my back on him. Not until I've truly understood who he is." Mrs. Romano studied me a moment longer. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Not agreement, not approval, but not rejection either. You're brave, she said softly. But sometimes, bravery isn't enough. She stood, adjusted the collar of her coat, and made her way toward the door. Before stepping out, she paused. She didn't look back, but her words stayed behind like a fragile thread tying us to something unspoken. If Lucas doesn't return quickly, don't worry too much. He knows what he must do to protect what he cares for. I stood silently as she disappeared down the hallway. The door clicked shut, and the apartment returned to stillness. But this time, the silence didn't feel calm. It felt like the hush before a storm. I sank into the chair, wrapped both hands around the cold teacup, and sat there surrounded by everything I couldn't yet name. I thought of his eyes last night in the library, the warmth of his breath against my cheek, the unfinished sentence he left suspended between us, and I wondered what waited for him at the docks. I wondered if he would return to me whole, and if he didn't, if the world he carried pulled him deeper into its shadows, would I learn how to love him quietly, from the edges, as though every ache of longing were folded gently into the pages of a book he never got the chance to read beside me. 3 days had passed since Lucas left, and still, I had heard nothing. No calls, no messages, not even a word passed through someone else's mouth. Each morning I woke with the same dull ache in my chest, as if my heart had slipped quietly into an empty space. And every morning I tried to fill that space with the smallest acts: brewing tea, tidying the kitchen, folding the blanket on my bed as though keeping everything in order might stop something from quietly collapsing. But inside, I was tangled, like a thread spilled in the dark, impossible to find its beginning again. I resisted the urge to call him. I didn't go to the Romano estate, because I knew if he wanted me to know something, he would tell me. And if he hadn't, there was a reason. But that understanding didn't ease the weight in my chest. On Wednesday evening, just after work, Carmela called unexpectedly. Her voice held its usual warmth, but underneath was a thread of something else. She told me someone had left a package for me at Dolce Vita. I went there right away. The cafe was already dim, nearly closed for the night. But there it was, the package sitting on the familiar table by the window. It was wrapped in plain craft paper and tied with twine. No name, no card. Just a small slip of paper with handwriting I now recognized too well. For the moments you need me, and I can't be there. I held the box in my hands like something fragile, something that might hum if I pressed it to my chest. I carried it home gently, not rushing, as if what waited inside deserved a certain quiet. When I opened it, I found a book worn and weathered, its spine softened by years of being read. The title was printed in Italian, L'uomo che piantava gli alberi, the man who planted trees. I opened to the first few pages and paused. There were handwritten notes scattered throughout the margins. The ink was neat, deliberate, restrained Lucas's handwriting. I turned on the reading lamp, made a pot of warm tea, and began to read. The story unfolded slowly, gently, about a man who lived alone in the barren hills of southern France, and who, without asking for recognition, planted tree after tree, season after season, turning a dead, forgotten landscape into a living forest. He asked for nothing. He simply planted, believing in the quiet power of persistence. Page by page, I let the words pull me in. Then I stopped at a note, marked in pencil just beneath a quiet line. Not all great things need to be witnessed. Some change comes from the quietest persistence. I froze, not because of the sentence itself, but because of the man who had underlined it. Lucas, the man with sharp eyes and measured steps. The man who could silence a room with one look. But here, in these pages, he was someone else. Someone who watched the world closely. Someone who believed in the quiet strength of things that didn't demand to be seen. Someone, perhaps, who saw himself in the figure of the tree planter, slow, deliberate, unseen, but vital. I turned to the back of the book. Near the final pages, another note waited. Everything lasting takes time, and even the one who plants the seeds needs someone to believe it matters. A shiver ran through me, not from the words, but from the feeling that they had been left for me, not to explain, not to convince, but to reveal. This was Lucas speaking without speaking, offering me a part of himself not through confessions, but through a weathered book and a few sentences scribbled in quiet margins. I closed the book and held it against my chest, eyes closed. For the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel empty. He wasn't here, but he had given me something more real than a call or a text. He had shown me a corner of his soul, the one not many were allowed to see. And I understood something I hadn't before. Yes, he might live in shadows, in a world of choices and secrets I couldn't yet reach. But he was also the man planting quiet seeds of hope in the dry, hard soil of my life. Soil I'd once thought would never grow anything again. And if he chose to keep walking that path, I wouldn't turn away. Not because it would be easy, not because I understood everything, but because I saw him, now, in ways that went deeper than words. I would wait, no matter how long, no matter how many pages I had to read to fully understand him. Because sometimes, just knowing someone is truly there, not with noise, but with the weight of their presence, is enough to make a heart stay. I was sitting by the window, the man who planted trees, still open across my lap, half read, half held, when I heard it 3 knocks. Firm, certain, unlike anyone else, impossible to mistake. I nearly stumbled out of the chair, my heart leaping so fast it felt like I'd run a mile before even standing. When I opened the door, there he was, Lucas. He stood slightly tilted, as though holding himself up out of sheer will. His white shirt was wrinkled, streaked with dust and dried blood along the left sleeve. One button near the collar was undone. His eyes, dark and deeply shadowed, looked hollow from lack of sleep, but they still carried that strange, unwavering calm. For a moment, I said nothing. I only stepped back, opened the door wide, and he walked in, without a word. He didn't sit at first, just stood there, caught in some space between return and recovery, as if his mind hadn't quite followed his body home. Then Lucas turned to me, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough, like something strained and barely held together. "I'm sorry I disappeared." I shook my head. There was nothing to explain. His presence was the answer to every day I'd waited. He sank into the armchair, breathing out slowly. "Something happened at the docks. One of my men was ambushed. It should have been simple. But this time, something was off." I sat across from him, trying not to stare at the blood on his sleeve. 1,000 questions crowded my mind, but only one slipped out. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, smiled faintly. "No, not my blood." We fell silent again, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. Then he looked up. His eyes, tired but honest, fixed on mine. "There are things I never planned to tell you," he said. "I thought silence could protect you. But silence isn't protection, it's distance. And if you're still here, if you truly want to know me, then I owe you the truth." I nodded. He started speaking, slowly, steadily, not hiding. He told me his family had been tied to the underworld of the city since he was a child, that he'd grown up amidst midnight meetings, whispered phone calls, and handshakes traded not with contracts, but with loyalty or blood. That when his father died, Lucas stepped in. Not out of ambition, but out of duty. Because if he didn't, someone worse would. He said he took control not to tighten his grip, but to prevent chaos, to stop the wrong hands from spilling more blood than necessary. But the cost of that control was loneliness, the erosion of trust, the slow death of the belief that someone might look at him without fear, without judgment, until me. His voice didn't waver, but something in it trembled quietly beneath the surface. He said that at first, when he saw me at the restaurant, I was just another face. But then I swore in Italian, fumbled with the broken plate, and looked him straight in the eye without flinching. I didn't flatter him. I didn't bow. I stood there awkward, frustrated, real, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he could be a man, not just a name. He paused. And then he said, "Today, when I came back, the first thought in my mind wasn't my mother or my people. It was you." I stood and moved to him, sitting beside him now, close enough to feel the weight he carried. My hand reached for the dried blood on his shirt, then rose to his shoulder, to his face. "No one's asking you to be someone else," I said quietly. "No one's expecting you to be perfect. But I need to know, Lucas. If I'm here, I need to be here for real. No halfway." He nodded. No argument, no promise, just truth in the silence. And then he leaned forward, touching his forehead to mine, kissing me softly, not hurried, not hungry. Just there, solid, present. And I knew. With that kiss, I had stepped deeper into his world. No longer the outsider, no longer someone he kept separate from the darkness. I was the one he chose to see, all of him, the light and the shadow. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. Because inside it, I saw something more honest than anything he'd ever tried to hide. His heart. And it wasn't beating for power. It was beating for something far greater. It was beating for me. That night, we never left the apartment. Lucas lay still beside me on the worn couch near the window, and I rested my head on his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, slow, measured, like the ticking of a clock I'd never known I'd been searching for. Outside, Chicago glowed under nightfall. The lights from distant buildings shimmered on the black ribbon of the river, painting a city I'd once believed I would never belong to. But here, now, with part of the truth spoken and the space between us no longer a quiet unknown, I found myself thinking about things I never used to let myself consider. I don't know if Lucas could read the thoughts behind my silence, but when he spoke, his voice was soft, careful, as if each word had been weighed long before he let it go. "Emma, if you stay, I mean really stay, not just for tonight, not for a few moments that pass, but if you walk into the part of my life I've never shared with anyone, have you thought about that?" I didn't speak. I just nodded. Lucas shifted to face me more fully. He didn't try to dramatize it, but in his eyes there was something raw, something honest. He said that if I stepped onto this path, there would be no more nights as peaceful as this one. There would be days he couldn't tell me where he was, moments when I might read his name on the news twisted, misunderstood, and I wouldn't be able to defend him. There would be times I'd wonder if I was living in the shadows of something more dangerous than I could fully grasp. And if that day came, if it all turned dark, would I resent him for it? Would I blame him for not keeping his promises? Or would I be strong enough to stand beside him still? I met his gaze and held it, for a long time. Then I said softly, "I'm not a child. I know what I'm walking into. I've seen enough to understand this isn't a fairy tale. But if I choose to stay, I won't run because I'm afraid. I'll only leave if I stop loving you. And that hasn't happened. Not now." Lucas didn't answer with words at first. He only lifted his hand and touched my cheek gently. Then he said the thing that made something inside me quietly break open. "Sometimes, what scares me most isn't the threats or the enemies. It's losing the only person who ever saw who I really am and didn't look away." He said he once believed that keeping me at a distance would protect me. That if he stayed on one side and I on the other, I wouldn't be dragged into the ugliness he carried. But when I placed my hand on his cheek in the library, when I didn't ask about the blood, when I only asked if he was hurt, he knew that distance had already lost its meaning. I rested my head against his chest, felt the rise and fall of his breath as it played softly through my hair. And in that quiet, I asked, "If I stay, what will be waiting for me?" Lucas didn't give me a vision of grandeur. He didn't promise sunlit days or dinner tables full of laughter. He said only this: "I'll never let you walk alone, even in the darkest night." I nodded. The words caught somewhere behind my throat, because in my heart, I had known the answer long before the question was asked. I would stay, not because he made me weak, but because he made me stronger. Every day with him might mean stepping into uncertainty, but every step would be toward something real, toward me. I chose to stay, not because I believed it would be easy, but because I believed he wouldn't let go as long as I kept holding on. And in a world where nothing felt certain, that kind of promise not spoken, but lived, was the rarest thing of all. And I, Emma Carter, had chosen it. 6 months had passed since that night, and everything in my life had changed, not with noise or sparkle, but in the quiet, steady way water moves beneath rock, carving out new rivers where none existed before. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. But it was real. I was no longer the tired waitress in a fraying apron at Giardino, rushing between tables and biting my tongue to hold everything together. I still smiled at strangers. I still made tea every morning. But now I woke up with a quiet sense that I was living a life that meant something, a life that belonged to me. Lucas still came and went. Sometimes he'd be gone for days, sometimes for a week or more. But he always returned, always came back with eyes a little less guarded, with hands that no longer felt cold, with a familiar question that never lost its warmth. "Have you eaten?" We didn't try to dress up happiness. We didn't pretend. We lived honestly. And it was that honesty that made everything stronger than any promise either of us could have spoken. One early spring morning, as sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, I sat quietly, flipping through a pamphlet for a local night school program. My hand stilled on a section about adults returning to complete their degrees, people who had dropped out because of family responsibilities, financial strain, life simply getting in the way. I didn't say anything to Lucas in that moment, but I knew. I wanted to go back, not to become someone important, not to impress anyone, but because I needed to finish something I once thought I never could. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was starting over. I felt like I was moving forward. A week later, I began night classes at a small community college on the west side of the city. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening, I left the apartment early, clutching my backpack, earbuds in, blending into the current of people chasing time and survival across Chicago. I always sat in the back row, taking careful notes, listening to every word the instructor said with the quiet intensity of someone who knew what it meant to begin again. No one in that classroom knew who I was, and I liked it that way. There, I wasn't Lucas Romano's girlfriend, not the woman who once had a thick envelope pushed toward her across a table by a wealthy mother. I was just Emma Carter, 26, a lover of classic literature, carrying a dog-eared book with handwritten notes whenever I had a free moment. During the day, I volunteered with a small nonprofit on the South Side, helping single mothers facing hardships I knew too well. I didn't have years of experience or a polished degree, but I knew how to sit beside a woman crying over an empty fridge and offer her a warm cup of tea. I knew how to listen without rushing in to fix. I'd learned that sometimes, simply being there without judgment, without haste, was enough to help someone take one more step. And in those quiet moments, I came face to face with my own wounds, the ones that had once ached in silence, and I felt something deeper than healing. I felt gratitude for the chance to begin again. Lucas never interfered with the things I chose to do, but he was always there. Sometimes it was his coat left on the back of my chair, waiting for me when I got home late from class. Sometimes it was a small note left by the stove, a warm breakfast he'd made before leaving at dawn. He never tried to change me or pull me deeper into his world than I was ready for. He simply let me be who I was becoming. And for me, That was the greatest gift he could have given. One Saturday afternoon, our volunteer group was handing out care packages at a small park. I was helping an elderly woman choose between a bag of rice or a loaf of bread when a familiar hand rested gently on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was, Lucas, in a simple button-down, no security, no warning. He looked at me and said quietly, "I just stopped by to see if you needed a hand." I smiled, handed him a bag, and we spent the rest of the afternoon side by side, two people standing among many. No spotlight, no names, just presence, just partnership. The last 6 months had taught me something I hadn't learned in years of survival. That the most precious things in life aren't always where you arrive, but how you choose to walk. I don't know where the future will take me, but I know this. I am rebuilding my life, not with blind hope, but with small decisions. With every class I attend, every act of kindness I offer, every time I dare to believe that I am worthy. Worthy of love, worthy of learning again, worthy of living fully, just like anyone else. And I know the road ahead is still long, but this time, I'm not walking it alone. That night, another autumn settled over Chicago. The city shimmered with lights, stretched out like a painting beneath the cool air and the quiet rustle of fallen leaves riding on soft winds. I stood in front of the mirror, slowly pulling up the zipper of the sea-green dress Carmela had carefully prepared for me. It wasn't a gown of sequins or glittering stones, not the kind meant to dazzle. It was simple, elegant, tailored just enough to honor the shape of a body I had worked hard to reclaim over the past 6 months. I was no longer the unsure waitress fumbling through that first gala night. Tonight, I returned not as someone on Lucas Romano's arm, but as Emma Carter, a woman who had walked through fear, through choices, through loss, and found her way back to herself. As I stepped into the grand lobby of the Riverside Hotel where the gala was held, heads turned. Not because I was unfamiliar in a room of known faces, but because I entered with a calm and quiet confidence that no one had given me one I had built. Choice by choice, day by day. Lucas stood waiting near the grand staircase. Tall, composed, dressed in a black suit that caught the light just enough, his eyes met mine across the room, and for a moment, everything else faded. He didn't rush to meet me. He waited because now I wasn't someone who needed to be led. I was someone who walked beside him. When the music began to rise, he extended his hand toward me and leaned in to whisper, "You really are the center of tonight." I smiled, placing my hand in his. Between us were stories left untold, silences that still held meaning, but one thing was clear: I had chosen this path, and I did not regret it. Throughout the night, I moved through conversations with ease with Lucas's partners, with old acquaintances who once looked at me with skepticism. But tonight, there were no questions about where I came from, no lingering doubts in their eyes. My presence said everything that needed to be said. I was not standing here because of Lucas. I was here because of what I had chosen, endured, and quietly overcome, all of which had brought me to this moment where I could hold my head high. As the evening drew toward its close, Lucas gently took my hand and led me to the balcony at the back of the ballroom. The river breeze slipped through the white curtains, lifting them softly like breath. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, "If tomorrow you wanted to walk away from all of this, I wouldn't stop you." His voice held no fear, no pleading, only the steady truth of a man who understood love not as possession, but as freedom. He said it not because he doubted me, but because he wanted me to always have the right to choose. I turned toward him, wrapped my fingers around his hand, and said, "I already chose, a long time ago, and every day I live is how I keep choosing." Lucas pulled me into his arms. There was nothing more to say. Not when everything had already been spoken, in the quiet strength of showing up, in the way our hands found each other without hesitation, and in the truth that love, the kind that lasts, is never about being held back, but about being seen, being trusted, and being free to stay. My story may not end like a fairy tale, but it is true. I was once a waitress, once faced with impossible choices between pride and love, between fear and courage, between the past and the future. And I chose to stand up, to keep walking, to start learning again, to open my heart, and to forgive myself. If you've stayed with me until now and there's a quiet restlessness somewhere in your own journey, I hope you understand that you too are worthy of love, of growth, and of beginning again, no matter where you come from or how many times you've stumbled. This story, though it belongs to Emma Carter, could just as easily be part of your own. How did this story make you feel? Was there a moment that stirred something deep within your memories? Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. I truly look forward to hearing what this story awakens in your heart. If you were moved by this emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the YouTube channel, Dear Single Mom, so we can continue walking together through stories filled with grace, resilience, and inspiration every day. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment. I wish you continued strength, a peaceful life, and quiet joy in every day. Until we meet again in the next video.